Security had seen it before, someone lingering near the lobby, expression unreadable, dressed too sharp for comfort. The man stood just past the threshold, not moving, not speaking, just watching as if the space belonged to him. To them, it didn't matter what was in his satchel or the badge clipped to his coat. What mattered was that he didn't look like he should belong here. A few radio clicks later, and the slow unraveling began. Whispers, glares, the tightening circle of suspicion. They didn't know his name, didn't ask why he was here. They just decided what he was. And that decision, snapped into place in under 60 seconds, would set off a chain of events that not only exposed every flaw in their protocol, but every hidden truth they'd trained themselves not to see. This wasn't just a test of security. It was a test of conscience. And they failed. If that gripped you, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. How fast do you think you'd recognize the truth? Kenton Ray stepped out of the rideshare and stood still for a moment on the sidewalk, looking up at Harrow Tech Tower as the morning sun hit the mirrored glass, turning the building into a gleaming dagger pointed at the clouds. He adjusted the charcoal trench coat around his tall, lean frame and swung his leather satchel over his shoulder. This wasn't just another consulting job. It was a blind entry audit for one of the country's most secure tech firms. A job only the best got called for. Kenton Ray was the best. He walked through the revolving doors, his shoes tapping against the polished granite floor of the towering lobby. The space smelled of fresh coffee and industrial-grade air conditioning. People in suits buzzed around, heads down, phones glued to their ears. He moved toward the security gates, scanning his surroundings with quiet precision. Everything looked like it belonged in a movie. Glass turnstiles, AI facial scanners, retina checkpoints, and armed guards at both ends. He stepped up, pulled out his temporary clearance badge, and tapped it against the scanner. Nothing. A red light blinked, then an error tone. Access denied. Kenton frowned. That wasn't supposed to happen. He tapped again. Same result. He turned to the nearby desk, where a security officer was watching him with narrowed eyes. The man stood slowly, his chest puffed out beneath a tan uniform with the name Roy stitched above the pocket. Something wrong? Roy asked. Kenton held up the badge. Kenton Ray, Ventry Systems. I'm here for a scheduled audit. Badge isn't syncing. Might be an error in the system. Roy didn't take the badge. He didn't move. Instead, he looked Kenton up and down, from the professional coat to the polished boots to the brown skin under a neatly trimmed beard, and gave a flat, unimpressed grunt. You tried a badge in? Twice, Kenton said calmly. Just need someone to call Rachel Kensley. She's expecting me. Roy didn't blink. He reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder and pressed the button. Dispatch, I got a possible intruder in the lobby. Male, black, mid-30s, long coat, carrying a satchel. Name's Kenton Ray. Claims he's with IT. Kenton's mouth opened, but Roy lifted a hand, silencing him like a teacher scolding a student. Hang tight, Roy said, then turned his back and returned to his post. People passed through the turnstiles as if nothing happened, but a few slowed, giving Kenton sidelong glances. One woman whispered something to a colleague, both of them giggling behind their hands. A younger guard with mirrored sunglasses perched on his head walked over. Problem? He asked Roy, glancing at Kenton with obvious suspicion. Red badge? Roy replied. Won't scan. Says he's doing some kind of security check. Kenton took a breath. I'm with Ventry Systems. Harrow Tech hired us for an internal breach simulation. I'm here to test physical entry barriers without prior notice. That's part of the protocol. The younger guard looked to Roy, who chuckled without humor. So let me get this straight. You're saying you're supposed to sneak into the building, and I'm just supposed to let you in? It's not sneaking, Kenton said, fighting to keep his voice even. It's an authorized test. If someone from the executive floor checks, they'll confirm it. Roy folded his arms. You got a contact? Yes. Rachel Kensley. And she just told you to walk in? Roy asked. No call. No meeting set. No escort. That's the test, Kenton repeated. No pre-alert. I'm supposed to test how your team handles unfamiliar access attempts. Well, Roy said, tapping the desk, we're handling it. Then he added into his radio, "Dispatch, still waiting on clearance for the guy calling himself Ray. Possible breach simulation, says it's authorized." "Possible breach," the younger guard repeated. "Might want to check that bag." Kenton's eyes flicked to his satchel. "You'll need proper clearance for that. It contains sensitive tools, hardware keys, encrypted devices. I'm under NDA to limit exposure." "Or," Roy said, "you could just open it, unless you've got something to hide." The two guards looked at each other, clearly enjoying the power imbalance. Kenton set the bag on the desk with measured care. "Handle it gently." Roy unzipped the satchel and pulled out a black case. He opened it and held up a USB device. "What's this?" "Security token. Multi-factor auth," Kenton replied. Roy smirked and held it up to the younger guard. "Fancy toy." The other guard chuckled. "Looks like something out of a spy movie. Got a listening device in there? Maybe explosives." They laughed. Kenton didn't. "That's a breach of contract. You're mishandling client equipment. You want to take it up with corporate?" Roy asked, clearly daring him. "Be my guest. Until then, you're not getting through those gates." As the standoff continued, more employees arrived. A few stopped to gawk. Kenton stood still, back straight, but he could feel the heat of humiliation creeping up his neck. One executive in a tailored suit whispered, "Security issue?" Another said, "Looks like he tried to slip in." Kenton tried again. "Call Rachel Kensley, please." "Already did," Roy said, though Kenton doubted it. "Claims he's here for an internal test. Badge won't scan. Says he knows the CIO." Kenton stayed calm, though his heartbeat had started to climb. "My name is Kenton Ray. I'm contracted to conduct an unannounced security audit. Everything was cleared last week with Rachel Kensley. I can provide her direct line if needed." The older guard didn't respond. Instead, he gestured toward Kenton's bag. "You carrying any devices not declared in the building manifest?" Kenton kept his voice level. "I'm carrying professional equipment. It's part of my job. Encrypted drives, MFA tokens, a secured laptop. All under NDA." The younger guard pulled out a phone and snapped a photo of Kenton's face before he could protest. The shutter sound was loud and intentional. "What the hell are you doing?" Kenton asked sharply. The guard shrugged, smug. "Need it for records. You know, in case this turns into something." "You can't photograph me without permission," Kenton said, his voice rising for the first time. "That's a violation of privacy." "So is breaking into a corporate building," Roy replied with a smirk. The older guard stepped between them and waved Kenton toward a side corridor. "Let's go," he said. "We're verifying your story. In the meantime, you'll sit tight." Kenton hesitated. "I haven't done anything wrong." "And if that's true," the guard said without flinching, "you'll be on your way soon enough." Kenton could feel it happening again. That cold disconnect when people saw his skin before they saw his credentials. Every degree he'd earned, every certification, every professional contract, none of it mattered in this moment. He was just another suspicious body in a controlled space. He followed them past the security desk, through a hallway lined with framed photos of executives and awards, and into a small glass-walled room that looked like it had been designed more for observation than meetings. The walls were transparent on three sides. Anyone walking past in the lobby could see him. A metal chair sat across from a fingerprint smudge table. No computer, no outlets, just a room meant to hold someone and remind them they were being watched. "Sit," the older guard said, then stepped out. The younger guard stayed just inside, leaning against the wall, tapping something into his phone with a faint smirk. Kenton sat down slowly, resisting the urge to speak further. He could still salvage this. If Rachel picked up her phone, if someone from corporate got involved. But until then, he was boxed in. A living exhibit. Outside the room, a pair of employees walked past and stopped mid-step. One whispered to the other. They both turned to look at Kenton like they were peering through the glass of a fish tank. Kenton met their gaze for a moment, then looked away. There was no point in trying to explain. Anything he said now would be viewed as justification. It was already too late. The visual told the story. Black man cornered, detained. Suspect, not guessed. A few minutes passed. The younger guard yawned and flipped through his phone. Kenton leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, carefully avoiding the urge to make sudden movements. In the corner of his mind, he imagined his team back at Ventry Systems, checking the clock, wondering if he'd made it inside, assuming everything was going smoothly. They had no idea he was already under informal arrest. The door opened again. Roy entered, holding Kenton's satchel. "We're going to hold on to this for now," he said casually. "Company policy, until we confirm who you really are." "You're violating corporate confidentiality," Kenton said. "That satchel contains sensitive client data." Roy scoffed. "You're not confirmed to have a client here, are you?" He handed the satchel to the young guard, who exited with it like it was evidence in a crime. Kenton clenched his fists beneath the table, squeezing the air until his knuckles whitened. He wanted to scream. Instead, he asked quietly, "Has anyone contacted Rachel Kensley?" Roy paused. "We left a message. She'll confirm everything," Kenton said. "I'm not here to cause problems." Roy looked at him for a long moment, then said, "You already have." The room door opened again with a deliberate hiss. This time, the man who stepped inside moved with an air of command. Mid-50s, tall, square-shouldered, hair buzzed military short and graying at the temples. He carried a clipboard in one hand and a tablet in the other. The security badge on his chest read Chief Vessler. Martin Vessler looked at Kenton with the bored disdain of someone who believed himself the final authority in any room. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't sit down. He just stood there, towering over Kenton, flipping open the clipboard. "So," Vessler said, dragging the word out. "Kenton Ray, mind explaining what exactly it is you do again?" Kenton straightened a little, keeping his voice controlled. "I'm a cybersecurity consultant. I was hired by Harrowtech for a scheduled physical breach audit. My point of contact is Rachel Kensley." Vessler raised an eyebrow and smirked. "Cybersecurity, huh? That's a broad term. You hack banks or just play pretend with a keyboard?" Kenton frowned. "I don't hack anything illegally. I test networks and infrastructure integrity. Today's assignment was to assess your physical access vulnerabilities." Vessler let out a dry laugh and began tapping the tablet. "Well, your little stunt worked. You definitely triggered a security response." He turned the screen so Kenton could see a photo, his own face, snapped from the lobby camera. "You tripped every alarm we got. Red badge. No escort. No confirmation. You really thought this would fly?" "Yes," Kenton replied evenly. "Because it was authorized. I have the contract. I was told to enter as an unannounced visitor and see how your team would respond." "And here we are," Vessler said, leaning over the table. "You sitting in a glass box, your gear confiscated, and your story still unconfirmed. If this was a real situation, you'd be in custody." Kenton stared at him. "I'm in custody now." Vessler tilted his head mockingly. "Oh, you're detained, not arrested. There's a difference. You want the latter." Kenton didn't answer. Vessler grinned and pulled a paper from the clipboard, unfolding it like it was a script. "So, according to your little resume, you're some hotshot vendor. Ventry Systems, CSSP, CISA. Been with 4 firms in 8 years. That about right?" "That's accurate," Kenton replied. "Those firms worked on defense contracts, Fortune 500 audits, financial sector compliance." "Relax," Vessler said, cutting him off. "I'm not interested in your TED Talk. What I'm curious about is how someone like you managed to slip through the cracks." He leaned in slightly, voice lowering. "Let's be honest. Cybersecurity vendor? That sounds like a nice way of saying freelancer with a laptop. You sure you didn't make this whole thing up?" Kenton met his gaze, fury burning beneath the surface. But he stayed calm. "That freelancer you're mocking has prevented multiple breaches for companies bigger than this one. I'm here because your CIO hired me, not because I want to be." Vessler scoffed. "You're not exactly making a convincing case. You didn't have a valid badge. You showed up alone. You refused to let us inspect your bag without talking about NDAs and private contracts. What were we supposed to think? You were supposed to check with your internal team before treating me like a threat," Kenton said quietly. "You were supposed to ask questions before assuming guilt." spoken like someone who doesn't understand protocol. Vessler snapped. My job isn't to guess who's innocent. It's to contain anything out of the ordinary. And buddy, you screamed out of the ordinary the second you walked in. Kenton opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was no winning this. Not in this room. Not with this man. Vessler smirked again and tapped on the tablet. You know what I see? A guy who's just smart enough to fake his way into places. Resume looks good on the surface. But dig deeper. No military background, no clearance level, no federal projects. You really expect me to believe you're what? The next Snowden. Kenton's voice dropped. I expect you to believe what your own executives paid for. If they did, Vessler said, they were either misinformed or you conned your way into the contract. He stepped back toward the door. We'll keep digging. Until then, you're not going anywhere. The tablet Vessler had mocked him with sat just out of reach on the other side of the glass, left behind as a final insult, its screen dark, as unreadable as the expressions of those who kept glancing in on him. Then, without warning, the door opened again, and Roy entered with two other uniformed guards, both larger than him, with no friendliness in their posture. One of them carried a set of flex cuffs in one hand and wore a hardened look that didn't waver when he saw Kenton. Stand up, Roy barked. Kenton remained seated. Why? Stand up now, Roy repeated, his voice sharper, eyes narrowing. We're moving you to a secure holding area. Orders from Chief Vessler. Kenton's lips parted. I'm not under arrest. I haven't been charged with anything. You can't just move me around like I'm… One of the larger guards cut him off by stepping forward, hand on his belt, eyes cold. Don't resist. Kenton's heart rate climbed. I'm not resisting. I'm asking for clarification. Roy grabbed his arm. You'll get plenty of clarification downstairs. The other guard pulled out the flex cuffs, and before Kenton could even object, they had him out of the chair and restrained. The plastic dug into his wrists. His satchel was already gone, and now his dignity followed. They walked him out through the lobby in full view of employees, executives, and interns who stopped mid-stride, phones already coming out. One woman whispered to a colleague, "What did he steal?" Another muttered, "That's why you don't just let people wander in." Kenton felt heat rising in his neck, not from shame for something done, but from rage at what was being assumed. The cuffs weren't necessary. The march through the building wasn't discreet. It was deliberate. Vessler had decided to make an example out of him, to show everyone that even someone who wore a suit and spoke calmly could be brought down in public like a criminal. They entered an elevator that beeped loudly as they descended to the lower levels. The walls inside reflected Kenton's stiff posture and tight jawline. He didn't say a word. He knew by now nothing he said mattered. They reached the basement level, a place that smelled like mildew and dust, with concrete floors and humming fluorescent tubes overhead. The holding room here was even less welcoming than the last. No windows, no glass, just four walls, a metal bench, and a small table bolted to the floor. They uncuffed him and shoved him inside. Roy entered behind them, holding a large plastic evidence tray. "We're going to process your belongings now," he said. "Standard protocol." "It's not standard," Kenton muttered. "This is harassment." Roy smirked. "No, this is prevention. You're the one who showed up without credentials." "I had credentials," Kenton snapped. "You just didn't bother to verify them." Roy ignored him and dumped Kenton's satchel onto the table, spilling its contents without care. His tablet slid out and clattered against the metal. Several USB drives rolled across the surface. Folders filled with redacted reports, contracts, and authorization papers fanned out like playing cards. One of the guards picked up a drive and held it up. Encrypted. Kenton replied tersely, "Yes. That one contains network mapping tools and login credential simulators." The guard dropped it into a clear bag and labeled a potential breach device. Another drive followed, then the tablet, then a second bag with his personal mobile phone. Kenton watched helplessly as items meant for professional inspection were treated like contraband. One of the guards knocked over a folder, and pages spilled onto the floor, charts, data flow schematics, vulnerability matrices, all landing face down, scattered. "Pick those up carefully," Kenton said, but no one listened. A boot stepped on one page, creasing it beyond repair. Roy gathered the loose sheets, shuffled them lazily, then stuffed them back into a bag without order. "Anything else you want to declare?" he asked, voice thick with mockery. Kenton shook his head slowly, eyes cold. "You'll regret this. You're tampering with confidential property." Roy chuckled. "Not if you're lying. Then we're saving the company." Kenton didn't respond. He stared at the evidence bags now piled in the corner, each one labeled with a number, each one holding the shattered pieces of his reputation. The guards exited, leaving him alone again. The sound of the lock clicking shut behind them was more than physical. It was symbolic. His credibility, his name, and his presence had all been locked away, stripped down to an inconvenience with dark skin and a bag of tech. Outside this room, people were already editing the story. They were filling in the blanks. Suspicious man caught in lobby, tech gear found, escorted away. None of them would think to ask whether he belonged there in the first place. His throat was dry, his stomach cramped with anxiety, and every inch of him felt more like a prisoner than a guest. He stared at the crumpled documents in the corner, the sealed evidence bags lined up like trophies of a successful takedown. The only sound inside the room was the dull hum of surveillance equipment and the occasional clang of footsteps passing the door. Then, finally, the lock clicked and the door creaked open. Chief Martin Vessler walked in slowly, carrying a paper cup of coffee in one hand and a half-eaten muffin in the other. His uniform was crisp, his presence arrogant, and he looked like a man who had already made up his mind. He didn't acknowledge Kenton right away. Instead, he walked around the room, sipping his coffee, glancing at the evidence bags as though inspecting them for sport. When he finally turned to Kenton, he gestured to the bench with his coffee cup. "On the floor," he said. Kenton blinked. "What?" "The bench is mine now," Vessler said casually. "Sit on the floor. You've already made enough of a mess in here." Kenton stared at him, heart pounding. "That's not necessary." "I didn't ask if it was," Vessler said. "On the floor, Ray. Or we can escalate." Kenton clenched his jaw but moved slowly down, settling on the cold concrete floor, knees stiff, posture rigid. His pride, already frayed from earlier, now shredded completely as Vessler sat on the bench he'd just vacated, stretched his legs out, and took another sip of coffee. "You know what I don't get?" Vessler asked, chewing his muffin with deliberate slowness. "Guys like you, always walking in like you've got something to prove. Suits too sharp, words too rehearsed. Like you've been waiting your whole life for a chance to show people you're not a threat." Kenton remained silent, staring straight ahead. "But here's the thing," Vessler continued, wiping crumbs from his lap. "Trust isn't something you can fake. It's earned, over time, through the right channels, through people vouching for you, not showing up unannounced with a bag full of gadgets and a smile." He took another long sip of coffee, sighing. "Real work, real responsibility take structure. You get that?" Kenton looked up at him. "What I get is that I followed your company's protocol to the letter. Your CIO hired me. She asked for an unannounced penetration test. This is the test." Vessler chuckled, shaking his head. "No, the test was seeing if a guy like you could make it through the front door without setting off alarm bells. And guess what? You failed. Because of your bias," Kenton said quietly. Vessler smirked. "Because of your behavior." Kenton narrowed his eyes. "My behavior? I walked in. I scanned my badge. I asked for help. I never raised my voice." "Exactly," Vessler said. "Too perfect. Too polished. No one walks into a place like Harrowtech without a wrinkle in their story unless they're trying to hide something." "I was hiding nothing," Kenton replied. "Then why is your gear encrypted?" Vessler asked. "Why is your resume so carefully curated? Why do you have answers for everything?" "Because I'm a professional," Kenton snapped. "Because I do this for a living. Because I've been through 100 audits like this, and this is the first time I've ever been treated like a criminal." "Maybe you've just been lucky," Vessler muttered, standing up. He paced slowly toward the door, still sipping his coffee. As he reached the hallway, he stopped and leaned into the threshold. Kenton couldn't see who was outside, But he heard another guard's voice, low and amused. "Still claiming he's a contractor?" the voice asked. "Oh yeah," Vessler said, chuckling. "Says he's some cybersecurity expert. Personally, I think he's better suited for stealing passwords or wallets." The other guard laughed. "Or both." Kenton stared at the wall, every muscle in his body tightening with humiliation and rage. He heard their laughter fade as they walked down the hall, footsteps echoing like drumbeats. Alone again, Kenton leaned his back against the cold wall and closed his eyes, but there was no peace in the darkness behind his lids. After everything Vessler had said, after being forced off a bench like a child punished at school, Kenton had reached a point where the absurdity of it all barely even registered. He wasn't just detained anymore. He was buried, abandoned in a place that pretended it was about security, but had become a stage for authority to flex against the defenseless. But even in the silence, Kenton knew he couldn't allow this narrative to go unchecked. He rose slowly to his feet, joint stiff, and stepped toward the locked door. He knocked once, firm, controlled. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. After nearly a minute, the door opened, and one of the younger guards stood outside, expression unreadable. "I need to make a call," Kenton said. "I'm requesting one call. You've had me in here for hours. No charge, no arrest, no due process. I have the right to speak with my client." The guard raised an eyebrow. "This isn't jail. You don't get privileges here." "I'm not asking for a phone call from a cell," Kenton snapped. "I'm asking to contact Rachel Kensley, the executive who hired me. My credentials are in that bag you labeled evidence. Let me speak to her, and this ends." The guard leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're not in charge here. You're not even verified. As far as our team knows, you're still a potential threat." Kenton felt the pulse in his neck quicken. "So I'm guilty until proven innocent." The guard shrugged. "You're nothing until proven something. Now sit back down or we'll have to escalate." "You keep saying that," Kenton said quietly. "But the only thing escalating is your abuse of power." The guard didn't respond. He simply closed the door again, the lock clicking into place like a punchline. Kenton paced the room. Every step echoed, shallow and sharp, bouncing off the empty walls. He tried to remember the last time he felt so powerless, and the answer burned in his throat. Never. Not during college, not during his first government contract, not even when he'd been pulled over on a late night in Georgia 2 years ago and told to keep his hands or they could see them. This was different. This wasn't a single incident. It was an orchestrated character assassination. Every interaction had chipped away at his truth, and now he was sealed off like a problem no one wanted to solve. The door opened again, but this time it wasn't a guard. A man in a navy blue blazer stepped in, holding a sleek tablet and a folder under his arm. He had thinning blonde hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a name badge that read D. Palmer Facilities Administrator. "Mr. A," he said, tone clipped and formal. "I'm Daniel Palmer. I've been asked to complete incident documentation related to your presence in this building." Kenton straightened. "Finally, someone from management. I'm glad you're here. I need you to contact Rachel Kensley immediately. I have a contract to conduct an audit for this building. My credentials were improperly flagged, and security has detained me without cause." Palmer blinked slowly, as though sifting Kenton's words for relevance. "I've reviewed the security logs and incident summaries provided by Chief Vessler and his team. Based on the information presented, I am here to complete a formal trespassing report." Kenton's mouth fell open slightly. "What are you talking about?" "There is no trespassing. I was contracted to be here." "That has yet to be verified," Palmer replied. "Your badge failed at entry. You had no pre-scheduled meeting on the calendar. Security reported evasive answers and unauthorized equipment." "You're accepting all of that at face value?" Kenton asked. "You haven't even spoken with the CIO." The CIO is currently in an executive review," Palmer interrupted. "I was told she is unavailable. In the meantime, I'm authorized to proceed based on the current record." Kenton stared at him. "You mean the record built entirely by the people who detained me? People who joked about me stealing passwords and wallets?" who refused to even call my contact. Palmer's eyes narrowed slightly, like a man deciding whether to feel bothered or bored. "Mr. A, I'm not here to debate office protocol. I'm here to process an incident. Your equipment has been confiscated and will be held until a determination is made. You'll be escorted off property following documentation. If further questions arise, legal will be in touch." "You're treating me like a criminal," Kenton said, "like a threat. But you haven't asked a single question to verify the truth." Palmer nodded slowly. "Security acted according to their training. I trust their judgment." Kenton took a breath and let it out slowly. "Of course you do." Palmer tapped something into his tablet, then handed over a form and a stylus. "Sign this." Kenton looked down. The header read, "Notice of unauthorized access and removal." He didn't touch the stylus. His mind cycled through options, searching for anything that hadn't already been shut down by ignorance, arrogance, or bias. Then, his gaze dropped to his wrist. The smartwatch he wore was more than just a tracker for steps and messages. It was tied to Ventry Systems' emergency protocol, a rarely used, client-specific escalation trigger designed precisely for situations where a consultant encountered a hostile environment or was prevented from completing a critical audit. The feature had been developed after one of Ventry's agents was accidentally detained during a similar job at a government facility. Kenton had never needed to activate it before. Today, it might be his last card. With a subtle tilt of his wrist, he tapped 3 times on the outer bezel, held for 2 seconds, and tapped once more. A soft vibration confirmed transmission. The signal would ping Ventry Systems' main office, transmit his location coordinates, and send an alert to the on-record executive contact, Rachel Kensley. It was silent, invisible, untraceable. No one outside would even know he'd moved. Now, all he could do was wait. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. 20 more. Still silence. Then footsteps, quick, heavy, authoritative, echoed from a hallway. Not the measured pace of a security guard. Not the robotic stride of Palmer's bureaucracy. These were urgent steps. The door to the holding room burst open, and the man who stepped in was not wearing a uniform. He wore a dark gray suit, black shirt, no tie, and fury in his eyes. "Why is my consultant in custody?" Kenton's breath caught. He recognized the face instantly. Roland Wexler, Chief Technology Officer of Harrowtech, stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 senior-level aides and a legal advisor, his face flushed with anger, his voice shaking the walls. "Where the hell is Martin Wexler?" Wexler barked at the stunned guard frozen behind him. "Get him in here, now!" The guard scrambled away. Wexler stepped fully into the room, eyes falling on Kenton. "Mr. A, are you all right?" Kenton rose slowly, his muscles aching, his pride barely stitched together. "Not even close," he replied. "You've got serious problems downstairs." Wexler's jaw tightened. "I just saw the emergency alert from Ventry. I thought it had to be a mistake. Then I checked security logs and find out you've been here for hours? In detainment? With no contact. Strip searched, mocked, interrogated, and accused of trespassing," Kenton said. "All while your CIO's name sat in their records untouched." Wexler turned to one of the aides. "Where's Rachel?" "Already en route," she said. "She's in shock." A group of guards appeared in the doorway, Roy among them, looking pale now, and behind him, Chief Wexler, eyes narrowed but no longer cocky. Wexler rounded on them with fire. "Who authorized this? Who decided it was acceptable to detain a cleared contractor without checking the audit log, without calling his contact?" Wexler began to speak. "Sir, he triggered a red badge, because that's what he was supposed to do." Wexler snapped. "That was the whole point of the audit. Unannounced entry, real-time assessment. And instead of identifying a vulnerability, you criminalized an asset. You humiliated someone we pay 6 figures to protect our infrastructure." Roy opened his mouth, but Wexler cut him down with a glare. "Don't speak. I saw the internal chat logs. I heard the surveillance audio. I heard the jokes. Passwords? Wallets? You think this is security work? You think treating professionals like threats based on gut feelings is part of your protocol?" Vessler's face turned red. We acted on a perceived risk. We followed escalation procedures. You followed your prejudice, Wexler interrupted. You ignored his badge, ignored protocol, and replaced policy with your own fear. Rachel Kensley entered then, breathless, her heels clicking loudly on the tile. Her eyes widened when she saw Kenton. "Oh my God, Kenton. I am so sorry." "This isn't on you," Kenton said, voice low. "It's on them. On every one of them who looked at me and decided I didn't belong." Rachel turned to Wexler. "This is a disaster." "It's more than that," Wexler replied. "This is a liability, a cultural failure, a moral embarrassment." Roland Wexler stood near the door, his face dark with anger. Rachel Kensley to his right, her hands still trembling, eyes wet with regret. Around them, the once confident guards now hovered in uncertainty, their smug postures reduced to shamed stillness. Kenton didn't rush to speak. Instead, he slowly adjusted his jacket, smoothed the crease at his shoulder, and reached into an inner pocket. Every eye followed his hand, some with caution, others with dread, and what he pulled out wasn't a weapon or a phone. It was a sleek, matte black access badge. No red stripe, no guest icon. The bold silver letters stamped across it read, "Internal Security Penetration Test, Level 3 Clearance." Kenton held it out toward Rachel, who stepped forward with shaking hands and took it. "I issued this," she said softly, then looked up at Wexler. "It's real. This clearance came straight from my office." He was to have unfettered access to public-level entry points and be exempt from standard reception protocols. This was meant to be a test of reflex, not judgment. Wexler took the badge from her and examined it, his expression tightening. "And it failed," he said. "Not because he didn't follow the rules, but because we didn't." Kenton remained still as Wexler stepped forward, face pale, lips thin. "Why didn't you present that badge earlier?" he asked, trying to sound composed. Kenton tilted his head. "Why would I? It defeats the purpose of the test. I was supposed to be an unknown variable. This was about seeing how your team reacts to uncertainty. And they reacted exactly how I expected." "You should have announced yourself more clearly," Wexler said, his tone still defensive. "You should have avoided triggering protocols." Kenton's eyes narrowed. "You think my job is to make you comfortable? My job is to test your system, and your system failed because it relied entirely on appearance and assumption." Wexler cut in sharply, turning to his aide. "Pull the surveillance footage. Every angle from the lobby, from the moment Mr. Ray walked in to the moment he was escorted out. I want it reviewed immediately. I want every radio transmission logged, every statement recorded." The aide nodded and rushed from the room. Roy shifted awkwardly near the door, his face ghost white now, his earlier arrogance nowhere in sight. Kenton continued, voice low but steady. "Do you want to know what your staff saw when I walked through that door? A black man in a coat carrying tech, without a receptionist to vouch for him. That was enough. Not the credentials, not the calm demeanor, not the fact that I followed every procedure outlined in my assignment brief. Just the optics. That's what failed." Rachel nodded slowly, her voice shaky. "He's right. We didn't just fail a security test, we failed a cultural one." Wexler looked between them and then back at Kenton. "What do you want from us?" Kenton didn't hesitate. "Accountability. I want training rewritten. I want new policy put in place, real policy, not paper rules no one follows. I want a review of every past incident where someone was flagged for acting suspicious without cause. I want it tracked. I want it audited. I want to ensure what happened to me never happens to anyone again." "Done," Wexler said. "You have full authority to write the restructure report. We'll fund its implementation." Kenton nodded once. "Then I'll need access to internal protocols, training logs, incident reports. Full transparency." "You'll have it," Wexler said, and he looked again to Rachel. "We'll co-author a full statement. Public. This won't be buried." "Good," Kenton said. "Because the story you tried to write about me today, it's not mine. I came here to test your walls, not get locked behind them. But I'm not leaving quietly." Wexler stepped back, speechless, jaw tight. but the fight had already left him. The moment the badge was revealed, the footage verified, and the narrative reversed, his power crumbled. He no longer commanded the room. Kenton did. By the time the afternoon rolled in, the leadership floor had initiated emergency action. Vessler was summoned into the executive suite, not for a briefing, but for an exit. Legal counsel stood flanking the HR director, as Vessler was presented with a formal dismissal letter. No apology was offered to him, no protest was accepted from him. As he walked out of the elevator, briefcase clutched with a white-knuckled grip, employees moved aside without a word. Gone was the commanding presence. In its place walked a man who had overplayed his power and lost it under the weight of accountability. His exit wasn't theatrical, it was surgical, clean, final. In his absence, an interim chief of security was announced by the end of the day. Lana Rodriguez, a decorated cybersecurity and ethics liaison from Harrowtech's satellite branch. Her first order of business wasn't to tighten security or enforce lockdowns. It was to speak to the entire building. Effective immediately, she announced over internal comms, all operations are paused for an all-staff address. Mandatory attendance. Bias in protocol is a threat vector, and today we failed. The auditorium filled fast. Chairs scraped across the floor as people filed in, uncertain what to expect. Some came defensively, convinced the situation was blown out of proportion. Others came quietly, still haunted by their role as silent witnesses. The front rows were reserved for executive leadership, and at the very center of the stage stood a podium, a single mic, and a man who had once been paraded through the lobby like a criminal. Now, Kenton Ray stood tall, his jacket crisp, his voice steady as it echoed across the space. Earlier today, he began, I was denied entry to this building because my badge didn't scan. That was intentional. My assignment was to test how your security team would respond to an unknown variable. What happened after that wasn't protocol, it was prejudice. The room remained still, 1,000 breaths held. I walked in wearing a coat and carrying a satchel, just like any consultant might. But instead of being questioned professionally, I was labeled a threat, photographed without consent, strip-searched, accused of theft, mocked for my career, and detained without due process. Not for what I did, but for how I looked doing it. A few heads turned. Eyes dropped. People began to squirm in their seats. What's worse, Kenton continued, is that every checkpoint, every chance for someone to stop and say, wait, let's verify this, was bypassed in favor of assumptions. And in security, assumptions are dangerous. When you act on fear instead of facts, you don't prevent breaches. You create them. Lana Rodriguez sat near the edge of the stage, nodding solemnly. Roland Vexler kept his eyes fixed forward, jaw locked. Today, I became a target in a system I was hired to test. But this story isn't just mine. It belongs to every person who's been second-guessed for being different. It belongs to every quiet hallway where silence stood in for courage. It belongs to every organization that's failed to audit not just its technology, but its culture. Kenton paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Security isn't just about firewalls and badges. It's about people. It's about who you trust, who you listen to, and who you doubt. And if your judgment defaults to suspicion based on skin, accent, or background, then your system is already compromised. He stepped back from a mic, and for a moment the room was silent, not out of shock, but out of reflection. Then slowly, applause broke. It started from the back, then the sides, then it moved like a wave to the front. Not everyone clapped, but enough did to change the temperature in the room. Kenton didn't bask in the attention. He simply nodded and walked off stage. His job wasn't applause. It was truth. Later that afternoon, Harrowtech released an internal memo. It detailed a new inclusion and accountability program, mandatory bias response training for all levels of staff, and a formal apology directed at Kenton and Ventry Systems. Legal protocols were adjusted to ensure that contractors undergoing test assignments would be logged in a secure system accessible only to executive security layers. The air inside the Expo Tech Convention Center buzzed with anticipation. Rows of LED lights glowed along the curved ceiling, illuminating the polished stage where banners hung high, bearing the bold, clean font of the event's headliner. Keynote: Kenton Ray Human-Centered Security in a Biased World. Attendees filled every seat, their badges flashing green under the scanner gates as tech professionals, students, CEOs, and cybersecurity consultants gathered from across the country. At the far back, standing near a side exit, dressed not in a tailored uniform, but in a Navy windbreaker with event staff stitched onto the breast, was Martin Vessler. He had traded his command for compliance, his authority for a clipboard and a walkie-talkie. His eyes, once so quick to narrow in judgment, now tracked the man on stage with a strange mix of regret and disbelief. Kenton stood tall under the spotlight, clad in a charcoal suit, voice firm, gestures confident. The crowd leaned in, not just to hear what he would say, but because he carried the weight of truth and the credibility that came from living it. Cybersecurity, Kenton began, isn't just about defending systems. It's about recognizing the people who defend them and the people who get harmed when systems, policies, or assumptions fail. He paused as a slide behind him changed, an image of a shattered ID badge with the word "Access Denied" etched in red. Weeks ago, I walked into a building I was contracted to protect. I followed every instruction given to me, and still I was seen as a threat, not because of my actions, but because of what people believed I represented. The biggest vulnerability wasn't in the firewall, it was in their perception. Vessler stared at the screen, his stomach tightening as the familiar image brought the memories rushing back. The lobby, the cuffs, the laughter, the failure to listen. We must build systems that question data, not identities, Kenton continued. We must train not only on response tactics, but on empathy. Because every time we ignore someone's legitimacy because of race, dress, accent, or posture, we're not increasing safety. We're eroding trust. Applause rose in waves. Kenton waited, then added, "The solution isn't just technology. It's humility. It's remembering that every face we judge might be a voice worth hearing." The applause that followed was thunderous. Kenton offered a small nod and stepped away from the mic. As the lights dimmed and people rose to leave, Vessler remained rooted in place, unsure whether to flee or confront the weight in his chest. He watched as a line of well-wishers formed, people offering handshakes, praise, and congratulations. Kenton greeted them all with quiet professionalism, never grandstanding, never indulging the fame now rising around his name. Vessler waited until the crowd began to thin. Then, with reluctant steps, he approached the stage from a side, not through the front rows, but from the shadows. He didn't expect Kenton to notice him. He almost hoped he wouldn't. But as Vessler stopped a few feet away, Kenton turned, and their eyes met. A beat passed, then another. Vessler swallowed, stepped forward, and extended a trembling hand. "I saw you then," he said quietly, "but I didn't really see you. I do now." Kenton looked at the hand, then back at Vessler's face. The man before him was no longer the chief barking orders. He was older now, not in years, but in weight. He looked smaller, as if the truth had hollowed something inside him. Kenton didn't smile, but he took the hand. "Seeing is the first step," he said. "The real work starts after that." Vessler nodded, eyes glistening. "I've started it. Got no choice now." "You always had a choice," Kenton replied. "You just didn't make the right one." Vessler let go, stepped back, and with nothing more to say, disappeared into the dispersing crowd. Kenton remained still, watching as the man vanished into the sea of badges and blinking lanyards. He felt no triumph, no vengeance, only a strange quiet in his chest, a small shift in the weight he'd carried. Redemption wasn't his goal, but if it happened, even in pieces, even in shadows, it mattered. Later, as Kenton exited through the rear of the center, he passed a poster for his next talk, Building Security That Sees Everyone. He paused, read the title again, and smiled faintly, because that was the point. Not punishment, not pride, but vision, seeing everyone, including those who once refused to see you. The end. If you've been gripped by Kenton's journey and the powerful message behind it, Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss future stories that dig deep into truth, justice, and transformation. What did you think of the plot twists? Did the ending hit you in a meaningful way? I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's talk about it. Your voice adds to the conversation.